They told her the enemy was a beast. They said if the British ever found her, she'd scream until her voice broke, that mercy was a lie and kindness was just another trick. So when Catherine Steinberg was dragged out of a frozen freight car in March 1945, chains biting into her wrists, she didn't pray for rescue. She braced for pain. 6 days locked in darkness, no food, no water. 21 women packed together like cargo, punished not for betrayal, but for saying the war was already lost. Then the doors ripped open. Cold air rushed in, boots crunched on snow, rifles raised. This was it. Catherine didn't look up. She couldn't, because if she saw their faces, the fear would become real. A British corporal stepped forward. He could have shouted, he could have ordered them out. Instead, he lowered his weapon, sat down in the dirt, and asked a single question. When did you last eat? That question shattered everything she'd been taught. No threat, no anger, just concern. Catherine broke down sobbing, not from weakness, but because in that moment she realized something terrifying. If the enemy wasn't the monster, then who was? This isn't a story about battles. It's about lies, silence, and the moment truth finally forced its way in. Catherine Steinberg didn't grow up believing she was brave. She grew up believing she had to survive quietly. Born in 1922 in a small industrial town near Dresden, Catherine was raised in a Germany already choking on defeat long before the war officially began. Her father worked at a textile mill that barely stayed open. Her mother taught her one rule above all others: don't speak unless you're spoken to. In times like these, silence kept you alive. By 1944, silence had become a weapon. The bombs came first. Night after night, the sky over Dresden glowed orange. Windows shattered, buildings folded in on themselves like paper. Catherine learned to sleep with her shoes on, a coat by the door, and fear lodged permanently in her chest. Everyone said the same thing: hold on, victory is still possible. But no one believed it anymore. Food vanished, trains stopped running, neighbors disappeared. And then the whispers started. They said anyone who doubted the war was a traitor. Anyone who spoke of surrender was worse than the enemy. And women, especially women, were easy targets. Catherine didn't join a resistance group. She didn't pass secrets. Her crime was simpler. One night, in a factory break room with the windows taped from blast pressure, she said something she wasn't supposed to say out loud. This war is already over. The room went silent. Someone looked away. Someone else remembered her words. 3 weeks later, the knock came. Not loud, not violent, just precise. 2 uniformed men, no insignia she recognized, papers already filled out. They didn't accuse her of anything. They didn't explain. They simply said she was being relocated for questioning. Her mother tried to speak. One of the men shut the door in her face. Catherine was taken with 20 other women, clerks, nurses, factory workers, none of them armed, none of them dangerous. They were marched at night to a rail yard outside the city. No lights, no explanations. The freight cars were already waiting. Old cattle cars, wooden, no markings, no windows. As the doors slammed shut and the bolt slid into place, darkness swallowed everything. The air inside turned thick almost instantly. Someone screamed, someone prayed, someone else started pounding on the walls until her fists bled. The train jerked forward. No one told them where they were going. No one told them how long it would take. Hours blurred into days. People fainted, others never woke back up. Hunger became pain, pain became noise. By the 6th day, Catherine could no longer feel her feet. She didn't know the war was ending. She didn't know Allied troops were already crossing into Germany. All she knew was that when the train finally stopped, Whatever waited outside would decide if she lived or vanished forever. And the worst part? She was still more afraid of being rescued than of dying inside that car. When the train doors finally opened, light stabbed their eyes like a weapon. Cold air rushed in, sharp and unforgiving. Catherine fell forward onto the frozen ground, her legs refusing to work. Around her, women collapsed one by one, bones wrapped in coats, faces hollow, lips cracked from thirst. No one helped them up. Guards stood in a loose line, rifles hanging casually, like this was just another routine stop. No shouting, no anger. That was worse. It meant they'd done this before. A sign stood crooked near the tracks. No city name, no distance marker, just barbed wire, watchtowers, and mud that swallowed shoes whole. They were marched through a gate without being told where they were. Inside, everything smelled like damp wood, coal smoke, and something else Catherine couldn't place at first. Later, she would recognize it as fear soaked into the ground. They were taken to a long wooden building. Inside, tables, paperwork. A man behind a desk didn't look up as each woman stepped forward. Name, age, occupation. When it was Catherine's turn, her voice came out weaker than she expected. Catherine Steinberg, 22, factory clerk. The man paused, not because he cared, but because he was deciding something. He crossed out her name with a thick pencil stroke and wrote a number instead. That was the moment it hit her. She wasn't Catherine anymore. She was prisoner 4187. They shaved their hair, not roughly, efficiently, like cleaning tools after use. Personal items were taken and tossed into crates without labels. Wedding rings, letters, photos. A woman screamed when they took a locket from her neck. A guard slapped her so hard she fell. No one else made a sound after that. The barracks were overcrowded, wooden bunks stacked 3 high, straw mattresses crawling with lice. The women who had arrived earlier didn't ask questions. They didn't welcome anyone. They just stared with eyes that had already accepted something terrible. At night, Catherine learned the rules without being told. Don't cry loudly. Don't ask how long you're staying. Don't talk about home. Roll calls happened before dawn and after dark. Anyone too slow was dragged out of line. Some came back hours later, barely able to stand. Some didn't come back at all. Work began immediately, clearing rubble, sorting scrap metal, carrying crates heavier than their bodies were meant to handle. Guards watched, counting mistakes, waiting for excuses. Hunger turned minutes into hours, hours into survival tests. One afternoon, Catherine saw a woman collapse beside her, no older than 30. The guard didn't shout, he didn't rush, he simply nudged her with his boot. When she didn't move, he made a note on a clipboard. That was it. No burial, no goodbye. That night, Catherine lay awake staring at the ceiling, her stomach burning, her muscles shaking uncontrollably. Around her, women whispered prayers in languages she didn't understand. For the first time since the war began, Catherine realized something worse than bombs existed. A place where time didn't move forward, a place where the war outside didn't matter, a place where people were slowly erased. And deep down, she understood the truth no one said out loud. Getting out alive wouldn't depend on strength. It would depend on staying unnoticed or becoming useful to the right person. Morning came without warmth. A whistle cut through the barracks before the sky had fully lightened. Catherine's eyes snapped open, her body already aching as if she had never slept. Around her, women rolled off bunks stiffly, some biting their lips to keep from crying out as their joints protested. Outside, frost coated the ground like broken glass. Roll call lasted nearly an hour. The guards walked slowly.
counting, recounting, checking numbers against paper. Any mismatch meant everyone stood longer. One woman swayed, barely conscious. No one helped her. Helping drew attention. Attention was dangerous. After roll call, something unusual happened. An officer stepped forward and spoke sharply in German. "We need workers with medical knowledge." A murmur rippled through the line. Catherine's heart slammed against her ribs. She was not a nurse, not officially, but she had assisted doctors before the war. She knew how to clean wounds, how to calm panic, how to stop bleeding. But stepping forward meant being seen. Remaining still meant returning to back-breaking labor, or worse. Seconds stretched. One woman stepped forward, then another. Catherine hesitated, then took a half step out of line. The officer's eyes snapped to her. "What experience?" he asked. "Basic medical assistance," she replied carefully. "Factory infirmary." He studied her like an object, then nodded once. That decision saved her life. She was reassigned to a makeshift medical hut near the edge of the compound. It wasn't mercy, it was efficiency. Sick prisoners slowed production. Someone had to patch them up enough to keep them working. Inside the hut, the smell was overwhelming. Infected wounds, unwashed bodies, old blood soaked into wood. Supplies were almost non-existent. No painkillers, few bandages, dull instruments reused again and again. Still, it was warmer than the yard, and for the first time in weeks, Catherine was indoors. She worked 12-hour shifts, cleaning festering cuts, draining abscesses, holding women down while guards watched impatiently. Some begged her to let them die, others clung to her hands like she was the last thing keeping them human. She learned quickly who mattered. Not the loud ones, not the strongest. The quiet women who didn't complain and followed orders. One evening a guard dragged in a girl barely 16, her leg mangled from a work accident. Blood soaked the floor. The guard shrugged. "She slows the others," he said. Catherine knew what that meant. She acted without thinking. "She can recover," Catherine said firmly. 2 weeks, then full productivity." The guard laughed. "And if she doesn't? Then you lose a worker now instead of later." Silence. The guard stared at her for a long moment, then spat on the floor and left. The girl lived. That night, word spread quietly through the barracks. 4187 can help. Women began slipping Catherine scraps of bread, bits of potato peel, anything they could spare. She tried to refuse, but they insisted. Survival was collective now. But usefulness had a cost. Guards began watching her more closely, asking questions, noticing when she spoke too confidently. One mistake, one act of defiance, and she'd be back in the yard, or worse. One afternoon, a guard overheard 2 guards talking. "The war is almost lost," one muttered. "Then they'll make examples," the other replied. That sentence stayed with her. That night, Catherine lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing something terrifying. Being useful could protect her, but it could also make her a target. And somewhere beyond the wire, the war was collapsing, which meant the camp's rules were about to change.
The change didn't come with an announcement. It came with silence. One morning, the guards were late. Roll call, usually brutal and precise, happened almost an hour after sunrise. When it did, the shouting lacked conviction. The men looked tired, nervous. One had bloodshot eyes and shaking hands. Catherine noticed immediately. Something was wrong. Rumors moved faster than commands. Whispers passed through the barracks like electricity. Allied forces were close. German units were retreating. Entire camps were being abandoned or erased. Erased meant no witnesses. That afternoon, the infirmary received no new supplies. No guards checked in. For the first time since she'd been reassigned, Catherine worked unsupervised for nearly an hour. Freedom tasted strange, dangerous. Then the trucks arrived. Engines growled beyond the wire. Not supply trucks, transport.
flatbeds and cattle cars. Empty, waiting. An officer gathered the guards and spoke quietly, urgently. Catherine couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She had seen this look before in other camps, other stories whispered at night. Relocation, which often meant death marches or sealed cars or something worse. By evening, lists were being prepared. Names, numbers. Catherine's stomach twisted when she saw a guard pointing toward the infirmary hut. Useful or not, she was still a prisoner. That night, the camp changed completely. Drunken guards roamed between barracks. Some fired shots into the air. Others screamed orders that contradicted the last order they'd given. One beat a woman senseless for standing too slowly. Another ignored prisoners entirely, staring east as if expecting ghosts. Power was collapsing, and with it, restraint. Near midnight, a young guard entered the infirmary alone. He couldn't have been more than 19. His uniform hung loose on his frame. He didn't shout. "You," he said to Catherine, "you speak English?" She hesitated, then nodded once. He swallowed. "British are close, very close." Her heart hammered. "What will happen to us?" she asked carefully. He laughed, a short, broken sound. "That depends on who's still alive tomorrow." Then he leaned closer and whispered something that made her blood turn cold. "They are ordering no prisoners left behind." Before she could respond, he straightened, suddenly terrified of being seen, and fled. Catherine stood frozen. No prisoners left behind. That phrase meant execution, mass graves, locked buildings set on fire. She moved fast. She whispered to the women in the infirmary, told them to spread the word quietly. No screaming, no panic. Panic got people shot. By dawn, the camp was vibrating with fear. Then, gunfire. Not warning shots. Real gunfire from outside the perimeter. Artillery thundered in the distance. The ground trembled. Guards ran. Orders were screamed and ignored. Some fled. Others doubled down, dragging prisoners toward the trucks. Smoke rose from the far end of the camp. Catherine helped a wounded woman hide beneath floorboards in the infirmary. Another she pushed into a storage crawl space. She knew she couldn't save everyone. That truth hurt more than hunger ever had. As chaos exploded around her, one certainty locked into her mind. If she stayed, she would die. If she ran, she might die. But waiting was no longer an option. She slipped out the back of the infirmary as explosions echoed closer, clutching nothing but a stolen coat and the number still burned into her identity. The camp was collapsing, and Catherine was finally moving toward whatever came next.
Catherine didn't run blindly. She ran smart. Explosions had torn holes in the camp fence, but gunfire still snapped through the air. Guards were shooting, sometimes at prisoners, sometimes at shadows, sometimes at nothing at all. The war was eating itself. She kept low, moving between burning structures and overturned supply carts. Smoke clawed at her lungs. Ash stuck to her skin. Every step felt like a gamble with death. Then she heard boots. Not the frantic stomping of fleeing guards. Disciplined, controlled. Voices followed, English voices. Her heart slammed so hard it hurt. The British. Everything she'd been taught screamed inside her head. They torture women. They enjoy cruelty. They kill for sport. She froze behind a rail embankment, body shaking. If they saw her, it was over. Better to hide, better to disappear. But fate didn't ask permission. A spotlight cut through the smoke. "Komm raus!" a German guard yelled nearby. Then gunfire cut him off mid-sentence. Silence. Then a voice she didn't understand, firm and calm. "Clear left. Watch the door." British soldiers emerged through the smoke like figures from a nightmare she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Helmets, rifles, faces hard with exhaustion.
Catherine pressed herself into the dirt, whispering a prayer she hadn't said since childhood. A boot stopped inches from her head. "Hold it." She looked up. A British corporal stood over her, rifle raised but not firing. His eyes moved quickly, scanning for threats, not cruelty. She expected shouting, pain, hands dragging her up. Instead, he did something that shattered everything she believed. He lowered his rifle, slowly, carefully, like she was fragile. "You hurt?" he asked. The words didn't register at first. English sounded unreal, like a radio left on in another room. She stared at him, frozen. Her voice cracked. "Please, I'm not a soldier." The corporal crouched down to her level, removed his helmet. His hair was damp with sweat, his face lined with fatigue, not hatred. "Easy," he said. "We're not here to hurt you." Her mind rejected it. This had to be a trick. Behind him, other soldiers secured the area, moving with quiet efficiency. No laughter, no cruelty, just focus. He noticed her shaking hands. "When did you last eat?" The question hit her harder than any blow ever could. She broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Tears spilled down her face as weeks of hunger, fear, and lies collapsed all at once. She hadn't cried in the camp. She hadn't cried when she was chained. But this kindness from the enemy destroyed the walls she'd built to survive. The corporal didn't rush her, didn't touch her. He waited. When she finally whispered, 6 days, his jaw tightened, not with anger at her, but at what had been done to her. "All right, that's gonna change," he signaled to a medic. In that moment, Catherine understood something terrifying and beautiful. The monsters she feared didn't exist. The lies did. And the people who chained her were never her protectors.
Catherine couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her gently. Not shouted, not ordered, not threatened. Gently. The British medic knelt beside her, movement slow, voice calm. He checked her wrists first. The metal shackles had eaten into her skin, raw flesh visible beneath dirt and dried blood. "Jesus," he muttered, not at her, but at what had been done. She flinched when he reached out. "It's all right," Corporal Henley said quietly. "He's here to help." Help. The word felt unreal. They guided her to her feet. Her legs nearly buckled. 6 days chained had turned muscle into trembling weakness. Instantly, 2 soldiers steadied her, firm, respectful hands, nothing more. No grabbing, no cruelty, no punishment. Her entire world tilted. They led her away from the ruined camp toward the railway depot that had been secured minutes earlier. Frost still clung to the metal cars. Smoke drifted lazily upward like the war itself was finally exhausted. Inside a cleared freight wagon, blankets were laid out. Someone handed her a metal cup. Water. She stared at it like it might disappear. "Drink slow," Henley warned. "You've been without too long." She obeyed. Each sip felt like fire and life at the same time. Tears slipped down her cheeks again, silently this time. Around her, other women emerged from hiding. Nurses, clerks, civilians. Faces hollow, eyes empty. Every single one expected brutality. Instead, they were given blankets. Food was coming, they were told. Medical help, too. Catherine watched as British soldiers shared their own rations, hard biscuits, tea, even chocolate, something she hadn't seen in years. This wasn't what the Reich had promised her. Propaganda had painted these men as animals. Yet they spoke softly. They joked quietly among themselves. One soldier hummed a tune as he wrapped bandages around a wounded woman's arm. Human. Painfully human. Hanley returned and crouched beside Catherine again. "You safe now," he said.
She shook her head slowly. "Why?" she asked in broken English. "Why help?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because the war's almost over, and because starving people aren't enemies. They're just people who've been hurt." Something inside her cracked wider than before. Her government had chained her. Her enemies had freed her. As the cold afternoon wore on, trucks arrived. The women were escorted, not pushed, not shouted at, into transport vehicles bound for a temporary Allied facility. As Catherine climbed aboard, she looked back at the camp one last time. The barbed wire, the guard towers, the place where lies ruled through fear. She realized something terrifying. If the British had arrived days later, she would have died there, not because of the enemy, but because of her own side. And that truth was harder to swallow than hunger ever was. The British facility was nothing like Catherine had imagined. No harsh barracks, no shouting officers, no cold metal floors. Instead, clean mattresses lined the walls, sheets folded neatly. A faint smell of antiseptic mixed with the aroma of stew simmering somewhere in the kitchen. The air carried life itself, not the stench of death and fear she had grown accustomed to. Catherine was led into a large hall. Rows of women sat quietly, shivering but alive. Their faces mirrored her own disbelief. Some whispered, asking each other in low tones if they were safe. Others stared blankly, still caught in the nightmare's echo. Then came the projector. A white sheet was unfurled. The lights dimmed. One of the British officers stepped forward, voice calm but firm through a translator. "This is what has happened," he said. Images flickered across the sheet, first slowly, then relentlessly. Concentration camps, crematoria, stacks of bodies, children emaciated beyond recognition, mountains of shoes, hair, gold teeth, the evidence of a world gone mad. Numbers flashed across the screen, millions murdered, millions more enslaved, millions vanished. Catherine's stomach churned, her knees buckled, and she gripped the edge of the chair. Each image was a punch to the gut, a whisper from history screaming in her ears. She saw names she had never known, faces she would never forget. The names of towns whispered in fear, of families she might have crossed paths with had the war been different. Her eyes stung, but she couldn't look away. Silence swallowed the room. Some wept quietly, some froze, unable to breathe. Catherine felt her mind fracture and rebuild at the same time. Every lesson she had learned from the Reich's propaganda, the lies about the British, the exaggerations about prisoners, collapsed in the harsh light of truth. She had been complicit in her own ignorance. The chains may have been gone from her wrists, but they had lived in her mind. For years she had followed orders, repeated propaganda, believed what she was told. Now she faced the consequences of not knowing, of not questioning, of not seeing. Henley, standing silently at the back, gave her space. His presence, calm and steady, reminded her that not all men were monsters, not all authority was cruel. Some had the courage to act with humanity when no one else would. Hours passed. The projector finally stopped. The lights brightened. Catherine's eyes were red, her hands trembling. She felt exhausted but alive, raw but awakened. The reality of what she had seen could never be unseen. One thought dominated her mind. How could a society let this happen? How could a government convince its citizens that fear and hatred were the truth? And yet, here she was, alive, fed, free, and facing a truth her own people had hidden from her. Henley approached her, crouching down to meet her gaze. "You okay?" he asked softly. Catherine shook her head slowly. "No, but yes," she whispered. I understand now." Understanding is the first step. The next step is to make sure you never look away again." She nodded. That was a promise, to herself, to those who had no chance, and to the truth that had finally reached her through the kindness of strangers. For the first time, Catherine realized that real courage wasn't about surviving chains, but about surviving the lies that could bind the mind.
Days turned into weeks, yet every morning felt like walking through the remnants of a nightmare. Catherine adjusted to the new routine, yet her mind was heavy. The facility, though safe and clean, was a constant reminder of what she and the others had survived and what the world had ignored. She helped in the infirmary, tending to wounds both physical and invisible. Bandages were easy, shattered spirits weren't. Henley visited daily, checking on the women, offering calm reassurance. His presence became a silent anchor, a reminder that kindness still existed in a world that had seemed all cruelty. One morning, Catherine carefully prepared a tray of hot broth. She paused, staring at the steaming cup. Her body craved sustenance, yet guilt gnawed at her. Thoughts of her family, her missing brother, her mother barely surviving. How could she eat while they starved? Whitmore noticed her hesitation. "You're not betraying anyone by living," she said softly. "Strength comes from being nourished. Only then can you help others." Catherine swallowed hard. The words sank in slowly, seeping through layers of indoctrinated fear. Each spoonful of broth felt like reclaiming a piece of her humanity. Outside, the winter frost still clung stubbornly, but the sun filtered weakly through the windows. Catherine would sometimes linger there, staring at the horizon, reflecting on Henley's first question in the freight car. "When did you last eat?" At the time, it was a lifeline. Now, it was a lesson. Small acts of care could break walls built by years of propaganda and hate. Other women adapted at different paces. Some laughed quietly, reclaiming small fragments of life. Others remained silent, haunted by what they had witnessed or endured. Catherine learned patience, both for herself and for them. Compassion, she realized, had to be given in increments, like seeds sown in frozen soil, nurtured until they could bloom. One evening, Henley approached Catherine outside the infirmary. The sky was gray, clouds heavy, reflecting the uncertainty she felt inside. "You're doing well," he said. "Not just surviving, but seeing." "What does that mean?" she asked, her English halting. "Seeing beyond fear, beyond lies," he replied. "You've witnessed cruelty. Now you choose what to carry forward, compassion or bitterness. That's your choice." Catherine nodded. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, but also a strange liberation. Knowledge had replaced ignorance, empathy replaced fear, and purpose replaced despair. Letters arrived sporadically. One from her mother, weak but alive, was a beacon. She read each line with trembling hands, absorbing the reality of her family's survival while confronting the devastation around them. The letter ignited guilt, yes, but also renewed determination. She would survive, not just for herself, but for those who had no chance. Night brought long hours of reflection. She lay awake thinking of the women left behind, the lives lost, the choices forced upon ordinary people. She realized survival was not enough. Witness was required. She had to remember, to speak, to act. Henley's quiet presence became her moral compass. Through small gestures, offering food, asking simple questions, and listening, he demonstrated that humanity could survive even the darkest chapters. By the end of her first month at the facility, Catherine could smile softly without shame, offer aid without fear, and even speak a few English phrases confidently. Healing was slow, fragile, but tangible. She understood now that the war had stripped away innocence, yet had also revealed something essential. Humanity, even in enemies, could heal wounds that violence never could. Weeks passed, yet every day carried the weight of memory. Catherine walked the halls of the repurposed facility, her hands steady as she tended to minor injuries,
distributed clothing, and assisted women still too fragile to move without help. The winter sun, pale and cold, filtered through frosted windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Catherine paused at one of the windows, looking out at the snow-dusted courtyard. Her mind raced with images: the freight car, the chained women, the hollow eyes of the camp survivors she had seen on the projector. She shivered, not from cold, but from the responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. She had survived, yes, but survival alone was not enough. The lesson Hemley had imparted months ago returned vividly. Compassion is action, not just feeling. And now Catherine had the chance to act, to ensure that the ignorance that once shielded her from reality would never rule her again. One morning, Lieutenant Whitmore gathered the women for a briefing. Through a translator, she explained that the Allied forces would be documenting stories, testimonies, and first-hand accounts from survivors. Every person had a voice. Every experience mattered. Catherine felt a spark ignite. She volunteered first, recounting her 6 days trapped in the frozen freight car, the fear, the starvation, and Henley's question, "When did you last eat?" She described the moment compassion had shattered her indoctrinated fear, how one simple act of kindness had changed her perspective on humanity. Her voice quivered at first, but steadied with each word. Other women followed, sharing experiences both harrowing and intimate. Tears, sobs, laughter, and whispered admissions filled the room. The weight of secrecy lifted, replaced by the catharsis of bearing witness. Catherine realized that acknowledgement, memory, and testimony were themselves acts of defiance against the atrocities committed. Outside the facility, small tasks became monumental acts of healing. Catherine helped dig a small garden in the courtyard, teaching some of the younger women to plant vegetables. Frosted soil resisted, but their hands worked carefully, turning over earth and scattering seeds. Each sprout that might someday break through the frozen ground became a symbol of resilience, a metaphor for human endurance in the face of cruelty. Henley observed from a distance, occasionally offering guidance or a reassuring word. His earlier lessons remained her compass. Compassion is stronger than propaganda, stronger than fear, he would say. Catherine repeated these words quietly to herself during long, sleepless nights. They were not just advice, they were a mantra, a call to responsibility. Letters continued to arrive from her mother. Each one carried fragments of a world barely surviving, fragments of hope, and reminders of guilt. Catherine resolved that she would use her experiences not just to heal herself, but to serve others, to bear witness so history would not forget, and so propaganda would lose its power over those who were still blind. One chilly afternoon, Catherine was asked to teach basic nursing skills to women who had never had formal training. She demonstrated wound cleaning, bandaging, and care for minor injuries, insisting that attention to small details mattered. She also shared soft, careful lessons on observing suffering, listening without judgment, and providing comfort, even when language failed. In these moments, she discovered a profound truth: survival was insufficient if it did not lead to understanding. Witnessing horrors, feeling the weight of history, and acknowledging guilt were necessary, but action was essential. Catherine began writing her accounts, carefully and methodically, knowing that one day these notes would serve as testimony. Every word was deliberate, a record of cruelty, resilience, and compassion. It was a way to fight back against silence, against lies, and against the machinery of dehumanization she had once unknowingly obeyed. Night fell, and Catherine stood alone in the courtyard, snow crunching under her boots. She looked toward the horizon and whispered, "I will not forget. I will act. I will witness." For the first time, she felt not just survival, but purpose. She had transformed fear into responsibility, trauma into action, and ignorance into awareness.
The war was over. Europe breathed again.
though the scars ran deep. Cities lay in ruins, families torn apart, and silence hung over countless streets where laughter had once existed. Catherine returned home to Hamburg, now a skeletal city, gray from smoke and ash, yet stubbornly alive. She carried more than memories, she carried responsibility and the lessons Henley had taught her. Humanity is a choice. Compassion is a weapon stronger than any gun. Her mother, Elizabeth, barely recognizable from months of starvation, lived in a small basement, still clinging to life. Catherine embraced her, tears freezing on her cheeks, but warmth returning with each heartbeat. For the first time since the freight car, she could act not out of fear, but purpose. She nursed her mother, shared her meager rations, and built a fragile home where survival was no longer mere endurance. It was care, hope, and rebuilding. Catherine began volunteering in the makeshift hospitals that dotted Hamburg. Children and the elderly, injured soldiers, and civilians who had survived bombings looked to her not just for medicine, but for guidance, for someone who understood that healing went beyond bandages and soup. Every life she touched became a reminder of Henley's quiet question in that frozen freight car. When did you last eat? It wasn't about the food, it was about recognition, humanity, dignity. Years passed, and Catherine married a local teacher, a man who shared her values of justice, curiosity, and moral responsibility. They had 2 children, raising them not in fear or propaganda, but in awareness. She taught them to question authority, to see enemies as humans, to stand against cruelty in any form. Every story she told them, every lesson she shared, carried the weight of memory and the power of compassion. Occasionally, she recounted her experiences to local schools, civic groups, and humanitarian organizations. She spoke not to evoke pity, but to ignite empathy. She showed images, read excerpts from her notes, and reminded listeners that atrocities are not only carried out by oppressors, they are enabled by silence, ignorance, and inaction. Every eye that widened in shock, every gasp, every whisper of disbelief reinforced the importance of her testimony. In quiet moments, Catherine would sit in her garden, now lush and vibrant, a stark contrast to the snow-covered courtyard she once tended in the facility. Each bloom reminded her that life could endure even after the harshest winters. The past would never be forgotten, but it could teach, guide, and illuminate a path forward. On the anniversary of the day she was rescued, Catherine wrote a letter to Henley, now decades older. She thanked him, not for saving her life, though he had, but for teaching her what it meant to see another human being. His simple act, a single question, had shattered years of fear, lies, and indoctrination. It had shown her that even in the darkest moments, compassion is a choice, and choice is freedom. In her final years, Catherine often spoke to her grandchildren about courage, morality, and humanity. She told them, "Monsters exist, yes, but even in the darkest places, humans can choose light. One question, one act of care can ripple across time, breaking walls of hate and planting seeds of hope." Catherine passed peacefully in her sleep at age 87. Her children, grandchildren, and countless others she had helped mourned her, but carried forward her legacy. Every life she touched became part of a chain reaction she had begun in that frozen freight car, a reminder that true power lies not in guns or propaganda, but in small, intentional acts of empathy. History remembered the atrocities, history recorded the horrors, but Catherine's story reminded the world that survival is more than living. It is witnessing, acting, and ensuring that the worst of humanity never again goes unchecked. Compassion, she had learned, is not weakness, it is strength. And that strength, born from a single question asked with care, endured long after the echoes of war faded into memory.